Thanks so much for joining us today to learn more about this new tool to help navigate federal resources for creative community development. My name is Ryan Stubbs. I'm the Senior Director of Research at the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, and we're proud to be presenting this tool in collaboration with the National Alliance of Community Economic Development Associations. To give you a sense of who we are and where we're coming from, the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, or NASAA, is the professional association of the nation's state and jurisdictional arts agencies. Every state and jurisdiction in the United States has a public agency that supports the arts, and NASAA's mission is focused on strengthening those 56 state arts agencies. The National Alliance of Community Economic Development Associations, or NACEDA, is an alliance of 38 state and regional community development associations in 25 states and the District of Columbia. Their members are champions, stewards, and thought leaders for community development at the state and local level. The primary research for this project was conducted by Metris Arts Consulting and Susan FitterHarris. And all of it was made possible through funding from ArtPlace America. So many thanks to ArtPlace and everyone that made this possible. Now we'll be launching a 2-question poll that should be popping up on your screen momentarily. If you can, please fill this out now. This will give us a better sense of where you all are in your creative placemaking journey and what types of projects in which you are most interested. Your responses will inform some of what we share today. So while you're doing that, I'll run through a few housekeeping notes. First, we invite you to change your name to include your pronouns. You can go to rename in the upper right corner of your video to do so. Also, we'll have a land acknowledgement. In the chat, you'll find a map maintained by Native Land Digital, an important reminder that the place that we call home first belonged to Indigenous people. You're encouraged to learn about the lands you inhabit and visit that link, and if you'd like, sharing so in the chat. Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're using a Zoom webinar today, so we aren't seeing all of your faces, so please feel free to introduce yourself and type in the chat box. You can type your name, pronouns, where you're located, and one word describing how you are entering the space today. We also have closed captioning available. And if you'd like to turn English closed captions on or off, please use the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitle. Captions are done with an automated service, so they won't be perfect, but they'll be pretty good. Also, for the question and answers today, throughout this next 60 minutes, we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A tool, which can be found at the bottom of your screen as well. We'll do our best to answer your questions live or through the chat function, and there will be designated times during the session where we'll answer questions that have come through the chat. Note that you can ask questions as yourself or as anonymous or anonymously, and you can like questions that other people have asked, which will put them higher in the queue. So you'll see that function in the Q&A and feel free to use it. Our session will be recorded and shared afterwards. Anyone who registered will get a link to the recording, and it will be publicly available on NASAA's YouTube page. So I will keep our poll open for a couple of minutes longer, but please do answer the questions if you can. Our agenda today is focused on providing an in-depth tour of a new guide for finding federal resources for creative placemaking that's now available at the web address creativeplacemakingresources.org. We'll also hear from Howie Snyder from the Steelyard project in Providence, Rhode Island, about how his project was able to utilize public funding. But first, I wanted to provide a little background on why we decided to produce this guide and why we made it. So the need for the guide was made apparent through NASAA's collaborative work with NACEDA to understand the policy landscape for creative placemaking. And I think the need was repeatedly affirmed as we dove deeper into the project. We know community organizations and localities are knitting together a lot of different resources to support arts-based community development. And there seemed to be an unrealized opportunity for federal funds to be used as part of the mix. Additionally, while studying creative placemaking funding sources, researchers at Drexel University found that federal funding was an important part of many projects, though perhaps underutilized, and they made a recommendation to provide a curated list of federal resources that can be used for creative placemaking. Our work here is really that, curating and highlighting the dozens of federal programs that can potentially be used for creative placemaking projects out of the thousands of total federal programs that are out there. Our hope is that our research and this site is a shortcut for practitioners so that you all can search and assess a much more manageable list of federal programs when considering what opportunities may or may not be right for your idea or project. In its simplest form, what we're showing you is a list, but we've added value to that list through plain language descriptions of programs, categorization and organization of different opportunities, explanations of how different opportunities can apply to creative placemaking, and stories about how others have used public resources to successfully finance their project. All of this has been packaged in the website that we'll show you today. So we believe this work has a lot of value and we hope that you find it useful. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that this resource, while helpful, only gets us so far. The work is still the work, and the need for greater capacity, equity, and knowledge are all substantial. We can't change the fact that federal resources require a great deal of effort and partnerships to pursue. But this guide addresses an important issue, which is that public resources for creative placemaking can be confusing, difficult to obtain, and extremely time-consuming to navigate. All right, so with that, I will share the poll results. And actually, Thomas, if you could share those results. Yeah, thank you very much for doing that in the background. So we just asked a couple of questions, and here's what we're seeing. So first, we asked, what is your experience with creative placemaking? We see that a majority of folks seem to be wanting to explore creative placemaking, but don't have a current project or program. But quite a lot of folks that are currently engaged in an ongoing creative placemaking effort. So people coming to the space from a variety of perspectives, which is interesting. Also, we asked what aspect of creative placemaking is of most interest to you at this time. We see that the majority of respondents selected arts and humanities, with also a lot of people coming from the planning and comprehensive development perspective, as well as housing, economic development, and physical revitalization. So coming from a variety of perspectives, but also I think a couple of the perspectives that we would think you all are coming from, both arts and humanities and community planning and comprehensive development. So thanks a lot for answering those questions. And with that, I will attempt to share my screen. Let's see here. Looks like that is working. And I'm just going to give you a brief walkthrough of the site navigation, and then I will turn things over to Susan FitterHarris of Metris Arts Consulting to provide some deeper insights into how to use the guide. So here's the site. Again, it's available at creativeplacemakingresources.org. I hope that what we've done here is intuitive enough so that anyone visiting can easily find out easily find what they're looking for, but a quick tour really can't hurt. So the background information for our site is available up here under Why This Guide and Guiding Principles. So it can be some useful background information. Here you see just some information on why we made this guide, as well as some key resources that might be helpful. We also have guiding principles, and these really articulate and acknowledge the value of integrating the arts and community development within, or integrating the arts within the community development process. And so we have a number of background articulations within this part of the site that can be useful. And on the left hand of the site, we have the basic navigation. So first off, we have how to use. And here is where you'll find the key elements that we've pulled for every opportunity. We also have application tips. And this is where you'll find some important tips for applying, including things to think about before you apply, as well as tips on completing applications. Under resource categories, this might be one of the most straightforward ways to get to relevant resources and browse what is available by category. You can select any of these categories and see all of what has been tagged within that category. And then there's a number of ways to search the site. Here we have advanced search, but it really isn't all that advanced. You can type in a keyword, you can search through different tags, search through different categories, and there's also a couple of places on the site to just type in a keyword search. So that is all pretty straightforward, I believe. Here we have case studies. We have 10 case studies that look at ways in which organizations and partners have successfully funded projects. And today we will take a closer look at the Steelyard project, which you can see right here. And hopefully a lot of this is inspirational. And finally here at the, in this final link, I'm sure that many of us have to deal with a lot of common or a lot of acronyms in our work, and it can be helpful to have a reference for some of these terms, especially when we're doing cross-sector work in the arts and community and economic development. And I wanted to point out just a couple of other features at the bottom here. While we don't encourage it, you are able to click on a link that will help you just print out everything and read through it. You can do so by clicking here and then using the print dialog within your browser. There is also a one-page PDF that gives a little bit of a background on the site. So, once everybody is able to meet in person again, and if it's helpful to pass on this resource, that is available. All right, well, I will stop screen sharing there. Thanks for taking that quick tour. And now, before handing things over to Susan, I wanted to call on a couple of ringers to give us their insights on a few things to listen for as we dig deeper into the guide. First, Jeremy Brownlee, Membership Director at NACEDA. Jeremy, could you share a few things that you'd advise folks to look out for on the site?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. And just let me quickly say, from NACEDA's perspective, we are really excited for this resource guide and really commend NASAA for the legwork and the inspiration to make this happen. I hope you all learn a lot about the site in today's webinar and really find it informative and useful as you're clicking through. Just some things for you to watch out for today. Hopefully you'll learn a lot about how to use this website. And I want to give some prompts or ideas of what you might look for when using it. There are a lot of federal resources here, and I want you to think about, are there any federal resources that you use that show up on this site? Many folks may have either used for a project or be familiar with the National Endowment for the Arts' Our Town program, which is a flagship program for creative placemaking. But maybe you access federal funds through the low-income housing tax credit, and you'll see that on this site too, and that might prompt some way of thinking about, oh, here are some federal funds that could be used for creative placemaking. Another thing to watch out for is one of the things that NASAA and NACEDA have really found in creative placemaking projects is there's a lot of collaboration or knitting of interesting funding sources. So also keep in the back of your head federal funding sources that your formal or informal partners use. Maybe you don't have a day of service grant, but and work with an organization that does. And that might trigger a thought in your head about, how could we work together utilizing these federal funds towards this type of project? And so, also want to keep that in your head too. We want you to know how to use this site and use it well, but we also want you to think about how could you go out into the space of your work and continue to brainstorm about types of projects. And on that note, I also want to pass it to my colleague, Kelly Barsday at NASA, who will share another idea of what to watch out for.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and hello, everybody. Really thrilled to see such a great turnout for today's session. We're glad that this information is striking a chord for you, and it certainly has been an honor and a privilege to collaborate on such an important project. Thank you, Jeremy, for the 2 points you offered, which I think are really great listening points as we move through today's session. And I want to add a third onto that list. As we're all listening to Ryan and Susan and Howie talk today, I want us to be thinking about how we can lift up the arts and creative practices as vehicles for community development, economic development, public health, equity, inclusion, and other community goals. I think the arts really have a special potency in helping to empower community work across many different domains. And we even saw some comments about that already coming through the chat channel and the Q&A box, really affirming that intersectionality of the arts and other sectors as an important core principle and best practice of creative placekeeping and creative placemaking. So let's all be listening for examples of that as the session unfolds. And I think that you'll find and hear that many of the federal opportunities that we will lift up will hit in that intersection of arts and in that space. I could go on, but I won't, because I think the most important contribution I can make at this moment is to get out of the way and let our colleague Susan FitterHarris from Metris Arts Consulting tell you more about the marvels that await you in the Federal Resources Guide. So Susan?
Great, thank you, Kelly. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Kelly said, my name is Susan FitterHarris. I'm a consultant affiliated with Metris Arts Consulting. Let me share my screen there. And I had the opportunity to do the research into the federal programs and write up the guide and the case studies for this site. So I'm going to briefly go over how to use the guide and give you a few insights from my research. First, we should note that, as Ryan kind of mentioned, there are not a ton of public grant programs that are specifically tailored to creative placemaking. The NEA Our Town program is the primary one that you've probably heard of on the federal level. It's a really great program, but there's just no way it can support all of the projects and programs that would like to use it every year. So the reality is that most creative placemaking initiatives are going to have to look elsewhere. The good news is that creative placemaking is a marriage of a whole bunch of different disciplines between community development, arts, and culture, and there are a lot of resources out there for those individual disciplines. The total universe of programs that you'll find in this site is about 68. It's not a database of all federal funding programs. You can go and search the grants.gov website for that. But what we've done is narrow down that universe of those thousands of options to those that we felt were the most relevant to the purpose of creative placemaking. So this site focuses more on placemaking related resources, which is to say, we didn't include things like grants for individual artists or pieces of artwork. We did include things like grants for arts programs that specifically focus on the integration of arts and humanities into a community context. We also include resources for a lot of disciplines like housing and like economic development that are not necessarily arts related, but where arts and culture can really add value. All of that is to say, you're not going to find a lot of resources in here that will be sort of one-stop shopping for a creative placemaking project. But if you can think creatively about the funds, the ones in this guide will lend themselves to aspects of placemaking efforts. In community development, as a lot of you probably know, it's really rare for any project to have just one funding source. You have to weave together a whole bunch of different sources to make something that's larger than the sum of its parts. So what we're doing here is giving you some of those threads to weave. So let's do a quick overview of the information that's included in each of the resources listed. I'm going to use National Park Service African American Civil Rights Preservation Grants as my example. So we'll start with each entry on this site. Each of the resource entries is going to have the same categories. The first category is the description. This is going to tell you the basics about the resource and what kinds of activities it can be used for. Next is eligibility. Who can apply for these funds? We find in many cases that a resource can be accessed only by specific groups, say local governments. But those groups may be able to subgrant the funds. They may be able to partner with a nonprofit to deliver the service or the project that they have in mind. So in addition to grants that you can apply for directly as nonprofit practitioners, let's say, we think it's important for you to be aware that these other resources exist and investigate whether they're being used or whether they could be used in your communities. So the role in creative placemaking is the next kind of entry that we have here. And we know that when you look at this list of grants, they don't all kind of make sense necessarily right off the bat why this would be related to creative placemaking. So this is our best effort to tell you kind of why we included each of these resources in the guide. In this case, for example, we could see these preservation grants supporting a historic property that anchors a historic or a cultural district that you're going to build a creative placemaking effort around. Next is match. Many federal grant programs require the recipients to provide matching funds, so the federal grant is not paying for the entire price of the project. So this section tells you what that requirement is for each program. In this case, match is not required, but where it is, we will list however the government asks for it, what percentage of the project you need to cover, or what amount you would need to supply. Next, we have a previous grantees section. And here we're trying to give a couple of examples of projects or programs that this resource has supported in the past. There's not always a one-to-one correspondence with every practitioner's work or every project that you have in mind. And honestly, the agencies don't always give us a ton of information about their previous grantees, but we've tried to give a sense of the breadth of possibilities for each of these resources, whether that's in terms of the types of recipients who have used them, the types of projects they've done, or the places that these funds have been used. We hope that gives you an opportunity to see similarities to yourselves or to your projects in a program that you might never have considered before. Moving on to the right-hand sidebar, the agency is just the federal department that administers the program. That's where this program lives. Maximum award is next. This tells you the highest funding level that is allowed by the program. But that, just keep in mind, does not always mean that that's the level of a typical award. Where we were able to find information about it, we try to include the typical award amount. So for example, here you can see that the maximum award allowed is 500,000. The range that is typically given is between 75 and 500,000. So you know you don't necessarily expect that you're going to get 500,000 every time you apply for this. Next is reporting. Almost all federal programs require at least annual program reports and semi-annual or quarterly financial reports. But we consider this to be a moderate reporting burden. Some programs require much more hands-on data collection and tracking, and we will list those as substantial reporting burdens. To be honest, as many of you probably already know, there really are no light reporting burdens when it comes to federal funding. So you will not see that in here. More information. Now, this section has links that will take you to the program's webpage. You can usually find links to application information here. So if you're interested and you're looking for an application, you start by going to the program webpage. You can see this one is going to show us how, it has some tips on how to apply and what they fund, but there is not a link to an application on this page. Now that can mean that there's not an open competition at this time, or it may mean that the agency website just is not up to date right now. By contrast, here is a link to the NEA's Grants for Arts Projects competition, which is currently open, and you can see that it's really robust. It has a lot more information and how to apply and things like that. Now, most federal applications run through the federal government's grants clearinghouse called grants.gov, which you can see right here. Your best bet, once you have found something that you're interested in, is to go to grants.gov and to search for it. You can see all these search criteria that you can use here. I will note that there are a few programs that do not solicit and accept applications through grants.gov, and we note that in the information section. For example, in this opportunity from the Appalachian Regional Commission, You can see you have to go through state program managers rather than grants.gov to apply. And so we tell you that, and we link you to a list of those state program managers here so you can find yours. Now let's take a look at how a user might approach a search for funding with this website. We envision a few different types of users for this site with different types of needs. And I think the poll kind of reflected that. Some of you have projects already underway. Some of you are interested and you just kind of want to see what's out there. So let's start with that. The first kind of category we're thinking of is folks who are not really sure what their needs are yet, but they just want to see what's out there. So let's say, for example, you are an arts organization. I know a lot of you on the call today are arts organizations, and you want to bring greater equity and inclusion to your neighborhood, or you want to use some creative ways to engage your neighbors, but you don't have a set project in mind yet. You might want to browse some of the broader categories here. So for example, you might look at opportunities to be a sub-grantee. You can, in the tags, scroll down to partnership and sub-grant opportunity and search for that. And that will, one second, the little control bars in my way. And that will bring up anything that's tagged as a sub-grant opportunity. So it may mean that your local government is going to apply and that they might sub-grant to a nonprofit. Or if you're a local government, you might look at this and say, where can I sub-grant to somebody in my community who's doing this kind of work? You can also look for grants that support planning processes where you could infuse creative methods or culturally sensitive engagement approaches. So you can go to resource categories and you can check out what's here under community planning and comprehensive development programs. Or you could go back to the advanced search page and there is a tag for planning. You might also want to check out pages that relate to your specific priorities, such as there's health and well-being. You can look at all of those programs and say, well, if that's really the aim of what we want to do and we want to get creative about it, here are some programs that have to do with that. Or you can look at things that are specific assets that are available in your neighborhood, like the libraries and museums category. If you work with a specific region or a specific population, say Native American or Native Hawaiian, there's a category for that. You should definitely check that out. You also might want to browse through the case studies and get some inspiration there from the stories of how others have approached creative placemaking funding, often in fairly unique ways. We hope these will give some inspiration for you. And last, maybe take a look at application tips. Again, if you're just still starting out, and we've discussed some of the critical role of partnerships in this kind of work, and it'll give you an idea of what you might be able to accomplish. Next, let's think about somebody who has a specific project in mind that they'd like to fund. Let's say, for example, you are a community development corporation that wants to start a farmer's market in a small town to showcase regional food and culture. You'll want to find funding sources that relate to food, culture, or rural areas. You could start on the resource categories page with food programs. And you'll see there are a couple of farmers market programs listed right here. You can also look at the housing, real estate, and physical revitalization programs page, where you'll find resources that support economic development and community facilities. Another way to approach it is to do a keyword search, which you can actually do from any page, for the word rural. And that'll bring up anything that's tagged as rural. You could also just search for farmers markets. Another possibility is on the advanced search page to fill in a bunch of different items, but I don't necessarily recommend that with a smaller universe of programs. Not to select too many variables. You probably want to keep your search broad and see what comes up. We also know that there are going to be users who are experienced in creative placemaking and who are already engaged in partnerships or projects and serving a specific community. This can include the local governments, neighborhood-based nonprofits that are working on comprehensive community revitalization. You already know what your work is all about and you want to find funding that supports it. There are a few different approaches you can take. First, you want to look at grant opportunities that relate to the work you're already doing. Let's say you're developing or preserving affordable housing. You might want to go right here to the housing, real estate, and physical revitalization page. Is there anything that could supplement your current funding? A keyword search for housing will also bring up opportunities. Second, if you want to find programs that are specifically geared to cross-sector efforts, take a look at community planning and comprehensive revitalization. A lot of the opportunities in here are ones that work across multiple sectors with different partners. So for example, if streetscape improvements are part of your effort, you can check out the Department of Transportation programs here, or you could do a keyword search for streetscapes. Third, you might want to look at arts and humanities programs for opportunities to support arts-related aspects of your project. These will include programs like the NEA grants that help add cultural or artistic elements that enhance revitalization work, or that support attempts to include a wider range of stakeholders and residents. Last, once again, taking a look at case studies could really give you some ideas about what other practitioners have done in similar circumstances to yours. So let's take a moment to look at a couple of these case studies. We've included case studies with this resource guide to show you how others have used federal and in some cases state resources to support creative placemaking efforts. We know that every project and every community is different, so these are intended to give you a flavor for the work, not really the recipe. We wanted to showcase how people have used a wide variety of resources in creative ways to serve their purposes. So we've included a number of different types of projects, from performing arts spaces to cultural programs, to murals, to community maker spaces and creative community engagement efforts. Here are just a couple of examples. Gemaji is a rehab of a historic building in downtown Duluth, Minnesota that created 29 units of permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless Native American families. It was designed to incorporate Native American art throughout the building and include public spaces and galleries where local tribal groups can come together and hold events, and Native artists can display and sell their work. The case study tells how the sponsor brought together a number of funding sources, including historic tax credits. You can see them down the left-hand side here, and community development block grant funds to make all of this work. In rural South Carolina, the South Carolina Arts Commission leveraged opportunity from the establishment of a federal promise zone, which is a program that's intended to build local capacity to access federal funds. The promise zone covered 6 rural counties. You can see them listed over here. And their representatives wanted arts and culture to be part of their larger revitalization picture. So the Arts Commission ended up helping assemble some public funding, including USDA rural program funds and NEA grants, that it then was able to funnel to those rural communities to help with their local priorities. These are just a couple of examples of how nonprofits assembled public resources to support creative placemaking efforts, but we hope you'll go through and explore these stories, and we hope that they inspire you to think outside the box about how to integrate arts and culture into placemaking work and how to think about funding that effort. Now I think we have about 5 minutes to take a couple of questions. I'm going to stop sharing. So if anyone has questions about how to use the website.
Great. Thanks a lot, Susan, for that in-depth overview. There's really a lot here, and I think we're seeing a lot of questions come in already. So I will, I don't think we'll be able to answer everything. We'll do our best to answer as we go along, but there are certainly some that we can try to at this point. So one question was related to the poll question, where talking about the overlapping of certain categories. And I just wanted to speak to that because the categories that were in that poll question really kind of aligned with the categories that are in the resource guide, right? And then there's a lot of overlapping, right, between categories. So I think as Susan showed us the different ways to search and the different tags that are on each of those categories, there's certainly a lot of intersection between those different categories. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. And related to that question, I think the same person asked about intersectionality of the arts, and I assume you're speaking to the intersectionality of the arts and other sectors, which is a lot of what creative placemaking is all about, integrating the arts with community and economic development and all of these things that we talk about to build a community. And the questions around that this isn't well understood by civic, municipal, and national leaders, what orgs are doing advocacy around this. So, I mean, I think the long-term work, I would say, of Art Place America was to build some of this understanding around creative placemaking and hopefully get it filtered into many of these other policy-making avenues. I think the work that NASAA and NACEDA has done here hopefully brings that more to life. And I would hope that our site allows for the articulation that there are these opportunities to integrate the arts into many other aspects of kind of the built environment and development. So there's a lot going on there, but I just wanted to speak to that briefly. Susan, would you add anything to that?
I think the only thing that I would add is that to continue to emphasize the idea of partnership. I mean, a lot of where the intersectionality comes in is who are you working with, because so many organizations, you know, have their strengths and not everybody can do it all. So an effort like creative placemaking usually involves a whole lot of players and a whole lot of partners. So who else can you bring under your tent to bring in some of these elements and aspects that you're looking for? And are those people that might be able to access funding that you cannot? I think that's where those partnerships become really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this also kind of leads into another question that was asked that says, the guide contains info on federal resources, and how likely is it that individual states have counterparts to the federal resources? So, you know, this was actually one thing as we were developing and thinking about the guide and how we were going to be able to do all of this. The idea was to focus on these federal resources because that was a manageable project in a way. There are certainly many state resources and state counterparts that have similar types of, I would say, opportunities or programs. I mean, things obviously are going to be a little bit different on the state level, but we definitely encourage for you to look into similar projects at the state level. There's a little bit of guidance about that on our site. And there's also a publication that NASAA released that talked more specifically about how do you partner with your state arts agency to understand some state resources around creative placemaking. So reaching out to your state arts agency is one way to do that. And there are some links on the site to help you get to learn more about state funding.
Yep. And one just got posted to the chat too, so take a look at that.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, maybe time for one more quick question. There was a question around under which category might we find economic development funding opportunities? And that is another thing that we were talking about. It's actually under the, let me see if I can remember.
It's under housing, real estate, and physical revitalization. And I will apologize to everyone on the phone. It was my oversight. I meant to include economic development in that title, but that is where you will find them.
Right, and you should be able to search for those resources fairly easy.
Yeah, and there is a tag for economic development. My apologies, Brian. You can search the tag for economic development as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, now there's a lot. There's many more questions. I'll try to answer some of those in the chat as we go along, but let's go ahead and turn things over. I think, Susan, you're going to now talk with Howie.
Yes. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Next, we're going to dive a little deeper into one of the case studies. We are going to look at the Steelyard in Providence, Rhode Island. We are lucky today because you have the opportunity to hear directly from Howie Snyder, who is the Steelyard's executive director. The Steelyard is a nonprofit industrial arts center that offers classes and shared studio space for really cool stuff like blacksmithing and ceramics. They also work with communities to design and install public art. In its prior existence, though, the Steelyard was a literal steel yard. And as a new nonprofit in 2001, the organization used EPA brownfield grants to clean up the site and make it a community serving space that was safe to be in. In his time leading the organization, Howie has worked with communities that are using public funds to achieve their goals, like Department of Transportation grants for streetscape improvements that include public art. So he's going to talk to us today about the Steelyard's experience using public funds. Thank you so much for joining us, Howie.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks everyone on the call. I've learned a lot already. We've gotten a few, you'll hear about some of our federal grant experiences in a minute, but we didn't have this resource to do it with. So I'm looking forward to taking the deep dive here and finding future collaborations. And I absolutely want to echo what Kelly said earlier about community impact, equity, and inclusion that we can do as arts organizations in creative ways. We bring our creative vision to every project that we're a part of. And I think some of the opportunities we'll talk about really highlight that.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Howie. I want to start off asking you this. The Steelyard has worked with sources from a few different public agencies, including EPA. You've worked with transportation funds and state government resources as well, both before and during your time as the executive director. How have you as an organization approached decisions to go after specific resources?
Well, I mean, I think like any organization, we go after projects that align with the needs of our community. So we develop plans. We always have the dreams of what we want to do. We have annual budgets and things to work within. And as a small organization too, often federal funds sort of dwarf our scale in a lot of ways. Like we've had a budget between $300,000 and $1 million for probably the last 15 years that ebbs and flows. And the thought of putting a big federal grant into that can really sort of tip our resources. So we really try to figure out what projects we want to do and what our goals are for the community, and then see what solutions are out there. So as we build a team, something like pursuing the funding for the EPA, really that came to us through our landscape architects and our local environmental management, who were helping layer the resources for us. They realized that we were going to be jumping through all sorts of hoops and having to do a lot of reporting just to do local environmental cleanup. And they said, this federal grant's not going to require much more. Why don't you add this to the mix? So it's really about us kind of identifying what our goals were and then trying to figure out the tools to make it happen.
Yeah, there's a real capacity question that you have to ask yourselves before you apply for something like that.
Definitely.
And this is a similar question, but there's a little bit of nuance there. I think it's safe to say every nonprofit is aware of the conflict between the need to find more funding on the one hand and the need to stay true to your mission. How do you think about how a resource fits with what you're doing versus kind of fitting yourself to the resource?
I think, again, in that case, it comes back to sort of our organizational values. With the environmental cleanup, for instance, we knew there were restrictions, or we knew there was an opportunity to use the money to do environmental cleanup. But as an arts organization, what we brought to that was a desire to recycle materials. So we built retaining walls out of crushed steel that we got from a local supplier. That's this like beautiful, unique retaining wall. And we made public art an aspect of every one of the cleanup steps that was taken. And that kind of drove the EPA crazy, that even our local environmental group or local environmental Department of Environmental Management didn't know how to regulate some of the stuff that we wanted to do. But we ended up being the first site in Rhode Island to use permeable concrete. And because it was a beautiful solution for us. So I think as an arts organization, we made sure that we brought our creative and community impact needs to that, so that even when we were taking, unusual funds for us, it really had to fit our values and our needs.
Yeah. What did the public funding enable you to do that you might not have been able to do otherwise? So why public and not private necessarily?
Yeah, I think the public funding helped us raise the influence or the status of the work in some ways. Another example of a project we did, we worked with the town of Bristol, Rhode Island, and they got a Tiger grant to redo the streetscape of the main street going through town, and not streetscape, but really the street. They wanted to repave, and they wanted to fix potholes and make a street that would last for 50 years. But they included in it streetscape amenities, bike racks, benches, trash cans, recycling bins. And it was one of the first projects that we ever got to do all of those elements with one client and one community. We hired 20 artists and did it as a big collaborative thing. Most of the people who we collaborate with, we're talking one element at a time. And the federal funding was just such a massive inflow for the town that they decided to make their scope run the length of this mile-long stretch of road. And so I think that scale allowed us to sort of think and operate on that scale, which honestly forced us to step up as a business and figure out how are we going to manage buying that much steel, hiring that many artists, and dealing with all the logistics. So the scale, I think, really inspired us ultimately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so the flip side, what have been the biggest challenges for you in using federal funding, and how did you navigate those?
Yeah, the biggest challenge, I think, is something your site addresses a lot, which is giving some of the examples of ways that people have used that funding in the past for creative placemaking. When we first were approached by the town of Bristol to do the streetscapes, we couldn't figure out how to fit a community organization and a group of local artists into the process. We had to provide specs that went to the architect, that went to the engineers, that got spec'd by the state into the funding so it could be approved for the federal grant. So it was really complicated to figure that out. And they were willing to do it. But I think that your site actually provides a lot of insight with how people have used the funds before that should help lower some of those barriers. Because that's just the biggest challenge is the glossary. We use different words to talk about what we do than a lot of the agencies. So it was a big bit of a learning curve there, but well worth it.
Absolutely. And I want to mention to the folks listening that if you go to the Steelyard's website, you can see that work for Bristol, and it's really impressive. Okay, so this is my big question for you, Howie. So Steelyard received EPA grant funding, and you did the remediation of your industrial property, and that was soon after you were founded, about 20 years ago. More recently, you've used funds as a contractor or a sub-grantee rather than applying for them directly and being the grantee yourself. Talk about kind of what has driven your decision to seek public funds in that way rather than seek them as a grantee, and whether you think that you would go back to being a grantee in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll go back to being a grantee in the future when the right project comes along. And it may not be an art project in some ways. As a community arts organization, we also do environmental work, we do placemaking, we do these other things that work with a lot of different disciplines. We've never actually received direct funding from the NEA. So what we've done is partner with municipalities who do get that funding, and we've been part of non-successful partnerships with the city of Central Falls and a couple other groups that applications that went in and were close but didn't get funded. But the city of Providence, and really Stephanie Fortunato and Lynn McCormick and the City of Providence Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism have won 2 Our Town grants. And I think the reason they won those grants is because they said, they went out to the creative community in town and they said, we're going to pick this part of town, any organization that has a creative project, bring your ideas and let's do this. And they handled the red tape, they handled the application. We just had to send our resumes and our project description and a budget, basically. And they really helped make sure to both amplify our project. I mean, we were a small part of both of those. We were probably, 10, 15% of each project, but being part of a larger coalition allowed us a level of exposure and opportunity to share our work and share the work of the artists at the Steelyard that we just wouldn't have had otherwise. To get an Our Town grant, for example, also, each town can only put in 1 application. So for us, we would have to go to the mayor and convince the mayor that the Steelyard was worthy of the application rather than the Department of
Right.
Arts, Culture, and Tourism coalition of 20 organizations. So I think really partnership is a benefit to a lot of federal agencies. I think they like to see that from what I've experienced.
Well, that, as we did the research and put this site together, that was sort of the common thread the whole time. Partnerships are so important and they can enable you to do so much more.
Yeah.
So my last question is a little bit open-ended then. It says, what is your advice for creative placemaking practitioners that are considering government funding?
Yeah, I think we're always considering it. We're always looking at like, what are our projects, what are our goals, and what are the unusual ways that we might fund them. We're doing a lot of work locally right now with health equity zones, which are funded through the Department of Health, or the Department of Labor and Training does job training to help us hire artists to do work in their community. So, there's these sort of unusual roots to it. And I think if we just keep designing the programs and making sure that we're true to that stuff, we'll find the funding solutions out there, and we'll keep applying. We'll keep applying to the NEA, and we'll keep coming up with good projects, and hopefully the right partnership will come along. Because that's, I think, to your other point, partnerships are a huge part of doing big projects. We're a small organization, don't want to take on all of the liability, the applications, and the details that go into the federal stuff just with a small budget. But we want to reach our community, so we're going to keep trying whatever way we can to do it.
Still find a way to do it.
We'll find a way, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for a few questions from the audience for Howie. Ryan, I want to invite you to let us know if you see anything that you want to pass along.
Yeah, a lot of great questions. And if anyone has questions for Howie, please go ahead and put them in the question and answer box. One thing I wanted to start with, Howie, is that, it sounds like there's a lot of creativity that goes into thinking about these partnerships and coming up with ideas for ideation and how something will fit together. I'm just curious, like, how do you do that at the Steelyard? It's just like a natural process. Do you guys sit down and meet and talk about it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think everyone in the community around here knows. If there's anyone else on the call from Rhode Island, please let me know later. But we try to make inclusive design process part of how we approach things. We don't believe in that. So we're a collection of artists working in the community. We believe that everyone has the right to influence the physical infrastructure of their own community. We talk a lot about place keeping, not about place making, and a lot about people taking pride in their environment, and artists being able to share their own iconography and their own culture in their own spaces. And that's sort of part of our approach to public art making. And I think the economic development piece, making sure, I love the values that you shared on your site earlier. I think making sure that artists are valued for their cultural contributions as well as their economic contributions, their economic need is really important. And, holding the line, making sure that artists are compensated for their work, but also given the chance, the platform for self-expression is important.
Great. Thank you. Indeed. Just another question. It seems to, I think you spoke to this about the importance of being able to partner with a municipality or some other type of agency, but I think people are curious about getting Tiger funds in specifically, and it sounded like there was some partnership there that you described. Is there anything else you could say about how that worked?
We can't even apply for Tiger funds, right? Tiger funds are really a municipal-driven grant and grant process. But, the Steelyard, we're a nonprofit organization, but we've also made it our business to work with other nonprofits, municipalities, small businesses to help provide placekeeping and placemaking needs. So we make, that's one of the services or one of the things that we do. And working with municipalities, understanding a municipality's timeline means that oftentimes from first conversation to final installation is 2 years, maybe 3 years. Like someone will come to us and say, we need new signposts in our neighborhood so we can highlight local businesses and put some cool art out there made by some of our residents. And the process, all of the approvals, the identification of funding and everything could take a long time. Working with municipalities is really great. They're great partners because they are thinking on the neighborhood level scale that we don't often think on. But being patient with their needs on those grants is important as well. I really think that we were talking with Bristol for at least a year before we were even in a contract to do the work. And it was probably another year afterwards until it was installed.
Right. Yeah, lots of time, lots of patience, I imagine. Yeah. Another quick question, somebody was just wondering if the Rhode Island School of Design was a partner in the project, or how you might interface with them in Providence.
Yeah, I mean, RISD is a partner in a lot of things around Providence, but they might have been a partner on some of the Our Town, one of the Our Town projects. But again, that was a coalition of, probably a dozen nonprofits and a lot of other like-minded groups that come together. And that's something that I really appreciate about Providence. And I know you're all calling from a lot of different arts communities, but it is a pretty collaborative environment. And I think being able to do those projects is important. And RISD certainly brings a lot of acknowledgement or recognition and some great creative voices to Providence to collaborate with.
Great. So we're just about at time here, and I'm not sure. I think we might as well go ahead and bring it to our final slide and wrap up. But really wanted to thank Howie for those insights, and Susan for all of your work on this project. So excited to have all of have everybody attending today and all of their interest in this work and in the site. Apologies for any questions that we may not have gotten to in the chat, but we will do our best to respond to those as we can. And I can also, provide my email. I think if we pull up our final slide, which just has some additional resources, this might also be helpful for folks to think about. Just wanted to share that within the site, so we do have links to more resources that I think are really useful in terms of background, understanding creative placemaking, and also NASAA resources to help you understand the role of state arts agencies in this work. I think there were questions about how you can get to sign up for ongoing communications from our organizations. A good thing to do is just to go to our websites. NASAA's is nasa-arts.org. NACEDA's is naceda.org. And there are ways to click on the newsletters to receive those moving forward. And there's also many other resources on those sites, on NASA sites, different people to contact, but also happy to answer specific questions if they weren't answered in the chat right now. So I'm just going to type my email into the chat as we close here. But with that, I think we're at time and ready to wrap up. So thanks again to everyone. Kelly, Howie, Jeremy, Susan, and Thomas behind the scenes, Frank. We'll hopefully be hearing from all of you soon, and hope this is a useful resource for you going forward. Thanks very much.